She steps up to a microphone she never wanted, eyes swollen from sleepless nights, voice steady anyway. And in a few spare sentences, she confirms what the subtext of 1,000 photos already hinted at. This was never just a marriage, it was a mission. So here's the jolt. Did Charlie Kirk's wife finally admit the real engine behind the brand and the cost of living inside it? Did the private half of a public empire reveal the truth we all suspected? Stay with me, because by the end of this film, you'll hear what she said, why it matters, and how that single admission reframes the life, legacy, and future of a movement. Before the headlines and the heartbreak, there was velocity. Charlie Kirk rose fast, co-founding Turning Point USA as a teenager and transforming it into a campus juggernaut with national reach. By 2020, he'd expanded the brand to daily talk radio, streaming shows, and a real-world events machine built on tight staging, frictionless merch tables, and a promise that young people could be the vanguard of a conservative comeback. He was part provocateur, part organizer, part algorithm, always in motion, always on message. The arenas were loud, the hallways were busier. The inbox never slept. In this mirrored world, stage lights facing phone lights audiences didn't just watch, they participated. They clipped moments, boosted segments, and turned gaffes or one-liners into microstorms that swirled for days. Turning Point racked up digital followings across platforms, with shows, docuseries, and constant content pushes that pulled the organization from campus tables to primetime chatter. This was politics as presence, not just persuasion. It rewarded stamina as much as strategy, and Charlie had both. Then came the second storyline, the one often softened by captions and filtered photos. Erica Francevay, better known now as Erica Kirk, former Miss Arizona USA, a podcast host with an unabashedly faith-forward tone, an entrepreneur whose projects wrap scripture in streetwear and devotionals in short-form audio. She was visible but careful, public yet guarded, an operator in her own lane who never tried to outshine the man she married in 2021. The union read like a mission statement: faith, family, country, content, community, calling. The timeline tightened. They met in 2018, got engaged in late 2020, and married in May 2021. A daughter arrived in 2022, a son in 2024, both kept off the grid, names withheld, a deliberate boundary in a life that otherwise streamed. In a media universe that monetizes access, the Kirks made one thing non-negotiable. The kids are ours, not yours. The choice wasn't unique among public figures, but its consistency told you a lot. It said, "We understand the machine. We'll feed it where we choose." By 2025, they were a recognizable dyad across a swirl of conferences, campus events, and pop-in interviews. Erica's voice, gentle but directive, threaded through devotionals and posts about resilience and surrender. Meanwhile, Charlie's presence, combative in interviews, affable with supporters, drove the tour circuit. On stage, the roles looked obvious. Off stage, the roles were braided, and then, overnight, the script tore. On the 10th of September 2025, while speaking at a Utah Valley University stop, Charlie was shot and killed. The shock fractured timelines. The American Comeback Tour froze. The political headlines collided with police briefings, eyewitness clips, and the quiet horror of a young family shoved into the center of a crime scene. Public grief swelled, from influencers to stadium singers, but grief at home doesn't ride the news cycle. It just sits in rooms and makes everything heavy. Brand narratives make clean lines. A leader on stage, a wife nearby, a tidy motto holding up the middle. For years, Turning Point USA's forward motion relied on a choreography of image, logistics, and message discipline. There were critics. There are always critics accusing the organization of blurring nonprofit boundaries or skirting campaign norms. There were denials and legalese rebuttals. There were reporters who framed the entire project as a media-first movement rather than a ideas-first movement. And beneath those arguments was the daily grind. Flights, green rooms, buses, blurred time zones, omnipresent phones. This is the part most viewers miss, the way the work rearranges a family's calendar and rewires its daily oxygen. Look closely at the couple's public pattern, and you see the invisible labor. She builds systems of faith-based content and community, Bible in 365, a devotional cadence, merchandise with scripture stitched into the seams. He builds stages, literal and virtual, where those values get amplified through politics and culture war flashpoints. Outside observers long suspected that the wife in this story was not merely supportive, but structurally essential. A co-architect of the worldview pipeline that made Kirk World more than a message. It made it a mode of life. Put differently, you could remove an event from the schedule and the brand would still hum, because the beat wasn't just in the speeches, it was in the rhythms of belief that Erica was curating day after day. And then came the rupture, what the headlines call a murder, the law calls aggravated homicide, the family calls unthinkable. In the first days after, as investigators assembled timelines and prosecutors weighed charges, something quieter happened too. Erica's silence broke. Not into rage, not into strategy, into testimony. She thanked law enforcement and allies. She spoke in the only lexicon that felt stable to her faith. She described the conversation with her daughter. Daddy is on a work trip with Jesus. Underneath that line was the admission so many suspected but never heard articulated so plainly. Their life was not politics stapled to a family. It was a ministry that used politics as a microphone. And she said the tour would go on. Mission before morning, perhaps, or more accurately, morning inside mission. Here's where it gets uncomfortable. Because grief narratives are supposed to be neat, they're not. Some will read that decision as strength, others as spin. Some needed a pause, a season off stage. Others, including Erica, seemed to believe the work itself was the honoring. In a sense, the mask versus reality turn wasn't about hidden scandal. It was about a hidden blueprint. The polished photo of a power couple implied a standard division of labor. Public man, private support. The reality finally said aloud was different. The brand was braided, the marriage was mission-shaped, and the admission? That she had been a central architect all along and would remain so now. Erica Franzfa and Charlie Kirk, both already in orbit. She was a former pageant winner turned faith-driven creator. He was the front man for a campus-to-capital pipeline. In 2018, their paths crossed, not by accident, but by convergence. Two people fluent in public life, both obsessed with the how of influence, not just the why. The conflict wasn't romantic drama, it was structural. How did two public people build a private covenant without starving the platforms that pay the bills? How do you hold Sabbath moments when your brand is built on always on? They experimented. They set boundaries that looked simple, but were brutal to enforce. Never post the kids. Anchor the week with scripture rhythms. Build separate lanes. His events, her devotionals, then cross-pollinate intentionally. Off-camera, they negotiated what worried friends knew could break a young marriage: proximity to power and the hum of praise. On camera, they projected warmth without drifting into overshare. It worked for a while because they kept the rules simple. Tell the truth about what you're doing. Keep the sacred things off the feed. The lane-making paid off. The audience grew inside a devotional cadence, midweek lifts, Monday meditations, a consistency that gave anxious followers a liturgy for modern life. His audience swelled with debate sparring, college stops, and a knack for staying quotable. The apparent asymmetry he in arenas, she in earbuds turned out to be symmetry. He stirred. She steadied. That's not a Hollywood line. It's a production reality. Movements need atmospheres. She built one. What this actually shows is how modern influence is assembled, not by viral lightning alone, but by the long obedience of habit, liturgy, and tone, the invisible scaffolding Erica specialized in, while the stage lights hid Charlie's face. A bride and groom in May 2021. Soft colors, private ceremony, phones an arm's length away. A Venn diagram that suddenly looked like concentric circles. The post-wedding challenge was not how to be together, but how to be together while scaling. Charlie's portfolio kept sprawling: radio syndication, streaming blocks, and the never-ending road of the American events circuit. Erica's work matured from scattered posts to a branded suite. Proclaim apparel for those who wanted their witness wearable. BIBLANE 365 for those who needed a plan more than a pep talk. If the skeptics saw a merch funnel, the faithful saw a discipleship track. Either way, the logistics were real. Fabric, sourcing, fulfillment, content calendars, back-end infrastructure that few outsiders think about. That's the point. The better the brand build, the more seamless it looks. The brand marriage made them legible to different audiences for the same reason. Coherence. You might disagree with the politics, but you couldn't accuse the couple of sloppiness. The runway from a Wednesday devotional to a Friday rally felt intentional. The language synced. The colorways even rhymed: whites, blacks, earth tones, gold accents. Serene on her feed, kinetic on his. They were building a house, not just a channel, and that meant materials had to match. What this actually shows is that influence at scale is a systems problem, and the marriage wasn't an accessory to the system. It was the system. 2 newborns in 2 years, a daughter in 2022, a son in 2024. No names and captions, no faces and thumbnails. The kids as sacrament, not storyline. Social platforms do not reward restraint. The quickest route to engagement is intimacy, unfiltered nursery pics, bath time bloopers, tiny hands holding oversized campaign pins. The Kirks said no. That no triggered a different set of pressures: rumor cycles, fan curiosity, even accusations of performative privacy. But behind the curtain lives a simpler truth. The less you show, the more you can change without permission. It's not just about safety. It's about the right to rewrite. If you haven't narrated every nap schedule, you can move cities, switch schools, hire help, fire help, and nobody gets to call you a hypocrite. The kids stayed unmonetized, which stabilized the family's interior life, but also strengthened the couple's public credibility with their core. A base that values order, hierarchy, and the idea that parents decide. This is not a generic conservative talking point. It's a strategy with receipts. Every time the algorithm begged for a family vlog, they posted a verse. Every time the market begged for a gender reveal, they posted a hoodie with scripture on the sleeve. What this actually shows is that boundary keeping can be a brand asset. Purity of message accrues power when you refuse to sell the private. A movement with admirers and enemies. An organization praised as a youth engine and criticized as a campaign-adjacent machine. A couple who carried the whole mess with a mix of steel and serenity. Wikipedia. There were seasons when scrutiny sharpened. Media investigations into Turning Point's tax posture and campaign proximity. Staff blowback and third-party analyses that framed the group as an influence complex whose legal lines were too close to comfort. The organization pushed back denials, legal defenses, point-by-point rebuttals. And while opinion writers wrestled over norms, life went on. Airports, green rooms, selfie lines. Then came the 10th of September 2025, when a campus event in Utah became a crime scene. According to multiple reports, a young suspect allegedly fired from a nearby rooftop. Sirens, lockdowns, the panicked clarity of bystander video. By night's end, the confirmation landed. Charlie was gone. Allegations hardened into charges. Arraignment dates set. The criminal case shifted from speculation to process. The shock wasn't just emotional. It was architectural. A movement built around a face had to decide whether the mission could survive without the grin, the cadence, the improvisational sparring. Donors asked quiet questions. Team members stared at whiteboards and wondered how you plan a tomorrow you didn't plan for. Then Erica spoke, and something clicked. What this actually shows is that succession isn't only about who takes the mic, it's about who already held the blueprint. Erica Kirk, widow, mother of 2, entrepreneur of devotion. 2 days after the shooting, she addressed the public. The words were simple, the subtext not. She thanked law enforcement and named the friends who stepped in. She spoke the only way a mother can speak to a 3-year-old about death, through metaphor and mercy. Daddy is on a work trip with Jesus. And then, almost offhand but absolutely seismic, she said the tour will continue. Not just because schedules were set, but because the mission was bigger than the man. That is the admission. That is what many suspected but rarely heard framed from the inner circle. The marriage was the movement. She was not only witness, she was worker, co-author, and now steward of the legacy. The reactions split along the lines we've already traced. For supporters, the statement landed like a resolve shot in a sports film team captain down. Captain's spouse steps forward and says, "We keep playing because that's how we honor." For critics, the decision read as brand maintenance, another piece of the show must go on. But if you strip out the politics and look at the human data, it's cleaner. When your shared life is a mission, pausing the mission can feel like abandoning the life. What this actually shows is that admission needn't be scandal. Sometimes it's clarity naming that the work was a family calling long before it became a headline. So what did she finally admit? In a few compressed sentences, gratitude to police, a child's lifeline phrase, a pledge to continue, Erica confirmed the architecture of a house many of us had only traced from the sidewalk. This wasn't merely Charlie's platform with a spouse in the wings. It was a two-handed build. Her projects, devotionals, apparel, community rhythms were never ancillary merch tables. They were the daily life bloodstream that gave the larger project its sense of purpose between rallies. His stages sparked, her framework sustained, and in that post-tragedy address, she removed the last ambiguity. She said, in effect, that the mission outlives the man because the mission began before the fame and ran deeper than the politics. She would not be inheriting a torch she barely recognized. She would be keeping a torch she had been carrying, quietly, for years. There is another layer to her admission, and it's not about influence. It's about interpretation. In telling their daughter that Daddy is on a work trip with Jesus, she revealed the lens through which the family interprets everything: platforms, criticism, tragedy. It is faith language, yes, but it is also operational language. It tells you how decisions get made under pressure. In that framework, the show does not merely go on for momentum. It goes on for meaning. The tour continues because it is part of the calling, not just the calendar. That's not a press release posture. It's a worldview. Some viewers wanted a confessional, a tell-all about political strategy, a behind-the-scenes exposé. That's not the admission she offered. Instead, she gave something rarer in public life, a sentence that aligns your assumptions with her reality. The spouse who smiled in photos was also the builder who set the house rules. The wife who kept the kids offline was also the strategist who kept the brand tone intact. And when the unspeakable happened on a September night in Utah, the person best positioned to carry the story forward was the one who had been authoring it, sentence by sentence, when no one was watching. In the immediate days after the shooting, the concentric circles of reaction felt familiar. Law enforcement updates, suspect identification, arraignment scheduling, and the maddeningly slow cadence of process. Reports named a 22-year-old alleged shooter and outlined the initial charges, including aggravated murder. Prosecutors signaled openness to the most severe penalties allowed by state law. The suspect's first major hearing, set for mid-September, shifted the national conversation from shock to procedure court dockets, replacing Twitter threads, filings replacing hot takes. This is where big stories always settle. In rooms where everything is fluorescent and nothing is fast. For the family, the fallout looks different. There are the small logistics of grief that never make news. Freezing casseroles, packing suitcases for memorials, checking a child's backpack, and finding a crayon drawing that explains the cosmos better than any grown-up can. There are also the public logistics. Memorial services with security teams, statements drafted and redrafted, pastors coordinating with event planners, a calendar that alternates between holy silence and microphones you didn't ask for. Public tributes poured in. Arena artists paused their shows to name the loss. Stadiums went quiet for seconds that felt longer. And a culture that often eats its own made space for mercy. Tributes aren't policy and they're not justice, but they are signals. Grief crosses aisles when the unthinkable looks like any of us under lights. Then there is the organizational future. Turning Point USA's orbit includes separate entities, media arms, and a constellation of partners who built their 2025 plans around a figure whose presence was assumed. In the weeks to come, boards will meet, interim hosts will rotate, donors will ask whether the momentum can translate into a different shape, and somewhere in the center of that swirl is a mother anchoring bedtime while release forms get printed for tomorrow's tribute. That's the thing about "Where Are They Now" segments. They often forget the now is a kitchen floor with a toddler, not a boardroom. Yet the macro picture is unavoidable. Erica's pledge to continue the tour reframed the timeline. It suggested that the machine would not shut down. It would retool. Maybe that looks like more testimonies and fewer takedowns. Maybe it means the devotional spine grows more visible while the political brawl softens its edges. Or maybe it looks exactly the same because the blueprint always had two halves: argument and atmosphere. In that model, the next chapter writes itself because it was already on the calendar, in ink, long before September. There will be legal crescendos, arraignments, motions, trial dates. There will be media crescendos, anniversaries, retrospective packages, and think pieces about security at public events. There will be family crescendos, birthdays you mark with balloons and candles, even if the cake tastes like memory more than flour. And there will be the slow, boring, necessary crescendos of work: inventory orders, script drafts, travel itineraries, and new hosts learning how to hit the line, break the way Charlie did, pause, grin, punchline. Strip away the headlines, and you find a lesson that applies far beyond one family or one movement. The difference between a brand and a life is the difference between spectacle and scaffolding. The spectacle is what we share. The scaffolding is what holds it up when everything shakes. For years, many suspected that the scaffolding of Kirk World wasn't just donor lists and stagecraft. It was a domestic liturgy prayer. Discipline, boundaries about children and time, and who gets access to what. In her brief, aching remarks, Erica Kirk admitted as much. She said the quiet part plainly. This wasn't a hobby grafted onto a marriage. It was a marriage grafted onto a mission. That doesn't make it holy, and it certainly doesn't absolve it of criticism, but it does explain the velocity. Movements with atmospheres outlast headline cycles because they train people how to live, not just how to clap. That is why the admission matters. It doesn't deliver a tabloid twist. It delivers a blueprint. And blueprints, once seen, change how you look at a house forever. You stop wondering where the furniture goes and start noticing the load-bearing beams. So here's the sober endnote. Whether you cheered Charlie Kirk or challenged him, whether Erica's decision to continue reads as courage or choreography, the truth that emerges is larger than this family. In a world that monetizes outrage and incentivizes intimacy, they chose to protect what they could and weaponize what they believed. And when history took an unthinkable turn, the person best positioned to carry the mission was the one who already made it livable. We've walked through the rise, the rupture, and the reveal. Now I want to hear from you. Did Erica Kirk's words confirm what you already sensed, that the movement was a family calling all along, or did her promise to continue recast the whole project in a new light? If this deep dive gave you a clearer lens, tap like so it reaches others who want more than a headline. Subscribe for the next chapter. As we track what changes and what doesn't in the wake of a loss that shook an entire orbit, and share this with the one friend who thinks the brand is just merch and microphones. The truth, as you've seen, is heavier.